Good evening. It is June 21st, 2016. My name is Jacob,
And I'm Danielle.
and we are the Proteus Podcast, ideas in all shapes and forms.
Indeed, indeed.
All
So,
shapes, all forms.
including the oblong ones,
The oblong,
which
the
is
toroid, the lesser known Klein bottle shape.
oh yes, forever forgotten, but not completely missed.
Yeah, a Klein bottle, a three-dimensional representation of a four-dimensional object, regularly depicted on a two-dimensional plane.
I won't lie, my eyes just glazed over. I was like, what? Geometry? What?
You know what? I've totally got to buy one of those for Ryan for his anniversary. He's the only person that would appreciate it.
Do it.
And I'm pretty sure he doesn't listen to this podcast, so that'll be easy.
Deliver it in a wombat bag.
Ooh, now you're on to something. It's like I'm going to just hit all the in jokes at once.
What have you been reading?
I've been reading science fiction because I am a person of distorted tastes and means.
Distorted tastes and means?
Well, my means are always distorted because I, live beyond my means, and my tastes are bizarre and eclectic at best.
Just saying it kind of, whenever you say say it again, distorted
Tastes and means.
sounds kinky.
Uh,
I have distorted tastes. When I look at my pornography, I like it to be slightly out of focus.
that, what? Okay. To each their own.
Just going off what distorted a distorted image,
Yeah.
distorted tastes.
Yeah.
So
It's very much like the quote that I can't attribute, which was, you possess a sense of humor not merely twisted, but actually sprained.
I try.
Yeah.
So what science fiction is distorted enough for you to feel that your views are distorted,
Well,
or your wants are distorted?
It's not so much that the science fiction is distorted. It's, I'll go from reading The Grapes of Wrath to reading Rendezvous with Rama to reading, a Jack Reacher novel and then strike that and reverse it. And, and then I might read a kid's book. I'm not consistent in any means.
I like kids' books.
I read all kinds of stuff. Oh, that's weird.
What?
I've never bothered to look at the managing my content section of Amazon for my Kindle. There is an update available for one of the books I bought. I'm really curious. I kind of want to push that button, but I don't know what will happen if I do. I'm going to skip that. Well, anyways.
Welcome, everybody, to the podcast.
Yeah. This is how we are. And if you like it.
Bottles and Amazon updates and distorted porn.
Eventually, we'll get to the point.
Yeah.
So anyways, the two most recent books I've read, both science fiction. I just finished Arkwright by Alan Steele, which is a really interesting science fiction book that takes on the problem of how most science fiction has a MacGuffin of technology that is not even vaguely plausible in terms of our understanding of physics right now.
Yeah.
And his main character addresses that. The main character at the very start of the book opens quite uniquely with the main character dying, and that's the and for the most part that's the last of him you ever see.
And then the rest of the book focuses around it.
It hinges around things he did, but it's all told by other people that telling the story of when they knew him or and things like that. There's a very one chapter which is basically like the first chapter he wrote of his own autobiography before he died. And then you get the rest of the story from his friends and family and stuff, so on and so forth. So that's an interesting structure for a book. And then it's generational. It keeps hopping down the generations to tell the story it sets out to tell. But he his actual character addresses the fact that most science fiction uses some kind of MacGuffin that lets all these things happen, or and then in the
Wait,
actual
do you mean
book, in the
a
actual novel,
MacGuffin?
well, like
Or
faster
do
than
you
light
mean
travel
like a-
is a MacGuffin, sort of,
Well, a
or a trope.
MacGuffin is like what everyone wants.
Yeah, it's
So
to make
maybe
science
more
fiction
of a-
work, everyone wants faster than light travel, so it
Well,
can be a MacGuffin, or it
Wait,
can be
what
a trope,
about Deus Ex Machina?
or that. It's got several names for the
It
things
works.
that
We're not going to tell you how.
Yeah.
It just does.
very much that. He's addressing that, and so he considers writing science fiction that, sticks to actual, science, and which is kind of fun because it links right back to the actual author of this whole novel, who does effectively the same thing. He builds us a science fiction novel around an entire concept of sending a ship to another star, and it doesn't do anything that we don't understand the physics of.
Okay.
And it's like I said, it's a generational novel, because to do so it's going to take, more than 100 years to send anything to the nearest theoretically habitable planet of all the planets we've found, right? And it does suppose, we finally do find a planet that is, close enough to the specifications that humans require to be theoretically habitable, which is bound to happen. We keep finding planets pretty much day by day at this point. And it builds on that whole structure. It makes it a very interesting novel because it confines itself to our current understanding of physics. And
But isn't part
still
of the
is an interesting and exciting novel.
so that's what I'm interested about. Like, isn't part of the allure of science fiction the seeing of something that is current outside of our grasp?
Yeah, but it does that because right now, today, we couldn't send something to Mars very effectively, let alone outside our solar system, mostly because of money, right? But it's
Right, but
outside,
it's
so that's outside of
money.
our grasp to actually build the ship and launch it and do these things. But that's what makes this novel so interesting and fun, is he finds a way to write a good science fiction novel that is engrossing, and you want to read more, and it's a page turner to see what happens, without having to, make something up that doesn't exist yet. I feel like the person that wrote it probably set it as a challenge for himself. Can I write a science fiction novel that only contains real science? And he pulled it off.
Isn't that what The Martian was?
Kind of. Yeah.
I mean,
but this is, even farther flung science fiction. It's in the same vein, writing a science fiction novel that'll appeal to a scientist, which is something that's very difficult to do.
see, whenever you say a science fiction novel that appeals to a scientist, it seems like it instantly no longer appeals to me.
Yeah, and I can understand that. But for me, because I've always enjoyed a good science, it appeals to me. And I know a lot of people that it would appeal to because, and teachers would probably enjoy this because it's well written in terms of the writing, as far as I can tell. I'm not an English teacher. But where it doesn't wander off, the scientific path, a science teacher could tell their kids, read this novel, it's interesting, but it sticks to the reality, and at the same time, without sacrificing the excitement of the story.
Okay.
And then, on the complete opposite side of the science fiction spectrum, where everything's made up and the plot barely matters, it's not true, the plot matters, I read Mechanical Failure, which is by Joe Zieja, maybe? Zieja. I apologize for butchering the pronunciation of your name. No one's ever read it to me.
And no one's ever going to listen to this podcast, so...
But if by some freak chance Mr. Joe, author of Mechanical Failure, reads this podcast, like you do with your ears,
A new medium.
I apologize for
coming
not
to
knowing
all
how to say your
podcasts.
name. I'm extremely white and don't do well with more than two vowels and a consonant.
Oh, poor Jake.
But anyways, Mechanical Failure, was probably the most fun science fiction book I've ever read in quite some time.
Good old-fashioned romp.
This is a great, good old-fashioned romp in the grandest style. This is like part Cracked.com comedy writing, part Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, part military fiction, and part science fiction, with a good dose of just tongue-in-cheek ridiculousness all rolled into one. And it comes out amazing. It's hilarious in all the right places. I wrote a review of this on Amazon. I liked it so much, and my main quote from that would be, "It takes a whole bunch of the classic science fiction tropes, throws them out the window, and builds better ones in their place."
Like Terminator 2.
Yeah, it's that funnier. There's just some moments of pure comedy, which you don't see in science fiction a whole lot. Science fiction has a nasty tendency to lend itself towards seriousness.
Yeah.
But comedy and science fiction come together beautifully, as Douglas Adams showed us. And this man is practically channeling Douglas in his own way. It's a really fun read. It was quick and easy to read, but just little one-off lines in there. You're like, aha, wait, I need more of this. And very good, very good.
So, as you know, I lean more towards the fantasy side of the spectrum.
Right.
And I've been rereading the works of Dennis McKiernan.
Okay.
And the Mythgar books, primarily. And I'm rereading the book that starts breaking away from the classical fantasy tropes. His first 5 books, the Iron Tower duology and the Silver Call duology and the Iron Tower trilogy, were pretty much unashamed, unabashed. I'm ripping off Tolkien, folks, but I want some fantasy books and no one else is writing them.
Sounds like the way you get it done. It's like, I would like there to be a fantasy story about this.
Right.
I guess I'll have to write it.
And then he wrote it. This one, called Dragon Doom, he's separating himself out away from those tropes, and he's really starting to build his fantasy world.
Nice.
And it's really good. What he does is, and this was published in 1990, so a while ago, but he's jumping back and forth in time, like centuries back to present day, to 3 years ago, back to present day, to 8 years ago, back to centuries ago. And he warned you about it in the foreword,
that he's going to be doing a lot of jumping around in history.
Yeah, and I was trying to remember how I felt about it the first time I read this book, which admittedly was in the 90s.
Yeah, because a lot of books that do that, you find yourself sort of rushing through one time period, ignoring it a little bit, so that you can get back to the part that is your favorite.
Right, and I'm not having that issue. As a matter of fact, I'm like more invested. Like going there, it's like, oh, I see what he's doing here. This isn't just an exercise for the reader. This is like, I see him now stitching together his world.
Yeah.
Like, it's less about this story as much as it is him establishing a timeline for this era in his storytelling.
That's really nice. It's impressive when an author does that well, because it is a hard trick to pull off, in my opinion. Having read enough books that do that, and I catch myself going, I don't care about this part, I want to get back to the good part, the other part, where the interesting story is happening. But when the two tie together properly, and when you read something in one that makes the rest make sense, it really if when done right, it's amazing. When done wrong, it's super obnoxious.
So that brings me to this question to you, good sir. Good sir!
Mm.
What's the difference between fantasy and science fiction? I mean, they're put together
Here it
in
is.
the bookstore.
There's a fantastic quote. That's
It's not the quote time
no,
of
hang
the
on. But it
session.
absolutely ties to this, and I've got to remember who said it for this to make any kind of sense. It's because I have a corollary to the whole quote. It's stupid and funny. I have to find it. Okay, Clarke's third law. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. But, and then Gim's corollary is any technology distinguishable from magic is insufficiently advanced. And my corollary, Jacob's corollary, to Gim's corollary, to Clarke's third law, is any technology sufficiently complex will cause the user to generate useless mystical rites designed in the aid of its use.
Okay.
That's to explain why your grandmother puts the Fabergé egg on top of the monitor to make the Wi-Fi connect.
Okay.
That's a user generating a useless mystical rite to make the technology work.
Right.
The gist
But
of it, so
that's not.
that
the
ties back
difference.
into my explanation. The difference between fantasy and science fiction is in fantasy, whatever it is either so advanced or is magic that it is unexplainable, whereas in science fiction, whatever it is so advanced yet is explained as being a piece of technology that is understandable to the user and to a basic degree by any layperson.
So science fiction is for the lay person.
It's not so much that, it's just that that's where the split is in my mind, is the thing that's making something fantastic happen is a mechanism and constructed and contrived by, mankind or sentient kind, and is something we wrought. We'll go with that. Something we wrought out of other things. Whereas magic, you're drawing an effect out of the aether or thin air or something like that. Right.
Okay.
And that's where to me, that's where the split is between the two. And
But what about
obviously
the
there's been
styles of
some
writing?
weird mergers between that where there's linkages between science fiction and fantasy, and that's what makes the annoying part of almost every Netflix catalog and things like that, where science fiction and fantasy are in one category, and makes it truly obnoxious to find what you're looking for.
Well, but that's what I'm talking about, like in the bookstore, right? In the bookstore, I remember when I was younger, the bookstores had a fantasy section and they had a science fiction section.
Yeah.
And now it's sci-fi fantasy.
And I think that's an obnoxious merger, because there's usually a pretty clear-cut line,
Well, not just in the books, but probably in the readership as well.
Yeah, there really is, and that's why I really rail against people like Netflix clumping them together in their categorization of things. And Hulu
Is it
does
really
the same thing. If you go
Netflix's
look,
fault, though?
it really, but it's been happening. I noticed
think
the merger
I
when
think
Netflix
Barnes
and
and-
Blockbuster were, sending you movies through the mail, and you could look through the types of movie you wanted, and there it was, sci-fi and fantasy together.
Yeah, but
And previous to that, in my experience, they had been categorized separately.
see, but I don't think that this is something that they did. I think this is something Barnes and Noble did.
That would probably be a good reason to blame Barnes and Noble for everything bad that's ever happened.
Barnes and Noble put my book next to these other books, and I don't like these other books.
Well, it's not even that I don't like them, because I truly enjoy a good fantasy novel just as much as the next thing. We'll get back to that. It's just that when you're trying to find science fiction, I really don't need, whatever dragons and sandals thing. You're polluting one pool from the
sandals?
other. Swords and Sandals fantasy is being mixed together with science fiction when you're trying to sort through them and find something interesting to read or watch is inconvenient at best and obnoxious at worst.
I would say that most oftentimes in fantasy, it's not really sandals as much as it is weather-worn traveling boots.
Probably, but my point is, a lot of those are referred to as sword and sandal in the
I've never
genre.
heard that
You've never heard
reference.
the sword and sandal genre? It's mainly applied
No.
to movies.
Yeah, and we're talking about books.
But like, yeah, but
What's a
it's
sword
been
and sandal movie?
Conan the Barbarian is a sword and sandal.
Ugh, that's not even fantasy.
It kind of is.
No, I
There's magic in
disagree.
Conan the Barbarian.
I would call
Fantasy.
that fiction. Just because there's magic doesn't mean it's part of a genre.
But it gets lumped into
Willow. Willow is fantasy.
it. Yeah.
Okay.
My point is they get lumped together in bookstores and in movies and all these sorting things. For some strange reason, Conan the Barbarian is in the same category as Alien versus Predator.
Garbage.
Garbage. Some people really love Conan, though. But, I mean, at what point do those two movies, besides being, in your pronunciation, garbage, where do they merge in genres? See? That's ridiculous to me.
Right, and I'm with you. Which I come back to the question: why are they put together?
I have no idea. Someone decided it was too much bloody work to add another table to their database.
So let's say
Either
you're
that or someone in
reading-
Barnes & Noble just couldn't be arsed to press return when making a list on the signs for the sections of the store. And it ended up being science fiction and fantasy instead of a sign for science fiction and a sign for fantasy.
Mhm.
You know, it's something probably as ridiculous as that, and it's unfortunately stuck and permeated across lots of venues and ways of encompassing media,
All right. So
much to
let's
my
say
great chagrin.
let's say you're reading a book.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good science fiction romp.
Mm-hmm.
And in the middle of it, the author introduces a dragon.
Well, in a good science fiction romp, I mean, you could easily have a dragon in Star Wars, and it wouldn't seem overly out of place. It would just be this bizarre, alien creature.
But Star Wars isn't science fiction, it's a Western.
I regret bringing it up. You could easily have a dragon in Star Trek, and it wouldn't seem particularly out of place. It would simply be a bizarre alien creature.
Let's say it was on Earth, and it's been there forever.
And it's been there forever. Well,
Yeah.
in that case, you're going to be going with the Seed of the Makers episode. Isn't that, what the heck's the title of that one? There's the one episode of Star Trek that alludes that humans and Klingons and Romulans and Vulcans are all from the
Oh, that was
panspermia
a
theory, where they were all seeded by one previous single race, and that's why
That
they're all
was
so similar.
the TNG episode where Picard takes a vacation on Risa.
There you go. The point is that's one of those episodes where it's just
Yeah.
been there ever since the,
I'm not going to get
the
credit for that.
you get tons of credit for that. Tons
Thanks.
of credit.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I
But,
need my punk points.
it would be one of those type episodes where was hidden there on Earth long before the dawn of man for some stupid reason that the plot needed.
Oh, excuse me. Dying over here. All right, so it can all be explained away through science.
No, I mean, it's that's how these sort of things generally work. If a dragon shows up in a science fiction novel, it's an alien, not and you might call it a dragon, and it might look like a dragon, but it's clearly some kind of alien creature.
Yeah, I was reading a mystery novel
Mm-hmm.
the other day. I think I ranted about this in an earlier podcast.
I don't know.
Where it was a mystery novel, and it had a little bit of supernatural to it. There was
I vaguely remember a rant about
like-
it. Suddenly, it went from mystery novel to supernatural bullshit for the rest of the book.
well, so the concept is that psychics exist,
Mm-hmm.
and they've been brought into the government to help with investigations.
Right.
and it's a psychic who's like solving a murder mystery. And then
Huh.
in like the last two chapters, they introduce a werewolf and a vampire, and yeah,
Huh.
and I was like, "What the fuck is this shit?"
Yeah, that's a hell of a left turn.
Yeah,
See,
and
there's a. I'm trying to.
and at the beginning of the novel, she had this skeleton key, and they were like, "It's a skeleton key," and it opens all these doors. And then at some another point in the novel, it changed from skeleton key to lock picks. And then at the end of the novel, it was referred to as a key ring,
Right.
which made me think that it was just poorly edited.
Yeah, that does sound like bad editing by and large. Trying to figure out which book it is. Looking back through all the books I've read, and I can't find the right one. I've read a couple books that are same character that does something similar, where he's like a paranormal investigator, but it's all very kind of hand wavy. Like maybe there's really paranormal stuff, probably not.
Yeah.
And then it kind of leans toward, yeah, there is, but no one's super sure at the end of things, and everyone's kind of just wondering what the hell was going on.
So, do you enjoy a good Clive Cussler novel?
I I have been known to partake in a Clive Cussler novel.
A Dirk Pitt novel at that?
Yeah, I'll admit to stooping so low.
There's a little bit of like shame in your
Wow.
in your
Well,
voice.
here's the fun thing about those is
Matthew McConaughey makes the perfect Dirk Pitt.
yeah, and of course, he's super upset about that. Not McConaughey, but the author,
Clive Cussler.
Clive Cussler. I went back. I decided at one point I liked those novels well enough because they're all the same story, just with a different, title and plot points.
Uh-huh.
So I was like, yeah, what the heck? I'll go back and read the first one, and start at the beginning and see how these things went.
Wow.
Right?
That's some dedication.
Way, way different books back then.
Yeah.
Because you can tell what he was trying to write, because he wanted to be writing he wanted to be writing 007 novels. Super misogynistic, super like the characters all smoke and drink and are just the worst kind of people.
Uh-huh.
And
But
you're just
yet
like,
they're doing
wow.
all these amazing things.
Yeah,
like
and yet they're doing these
raising the
amazing
Titanic.
things. Yeah, and so you're kind of just sitting there going, I don't think I should be reading this. This doesn't seem like
Good,
it seems bad.
good-natured people don't do these things.
Yeah, exactly. There's just wildly sexist stuff that's super inappropriate now, because he started on these back in the 70s, I think.
Uh-huh.
They're terrible. I mean, you're just, what? you read a bit of it and you're just, I can't believe this is happening. Why?
See, but that's also against the backdrop of today.
Yeah, against the backdrop of today, they're horrible. Against the backdrop of the 70s, they were maybe okay. Maybe.
My mom read those books like mad when she was a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the stories she told me is that she was reading these and she hadn't quite gotten the grasp between fiction and nonfiction.
Mm-hmm.
And so she was reading Raise the Titanic.
Right.
And
Oh, yeah. That
she-
was probably the first one I ever read. I didn't know what it was. I just read it randomly from the library, I think,
Right.
and
And
had
so-
fond memories of it.
And so she finished reading it and she was so excited because she had just learned that we had raised the Titanic. And she
Oh.
went And she went and told her mom and my grandmother, and my grandmother was like, Cheryl, you do know what fiction means, don't you?
That is
Hilarious.
magical. And it's just,
Really.
I don't. Huh.
Yeah. Clive Cussler bringing, you know, a sense of awe and amazement to my poor befuddled mother.
That is priceless in its own right.
Uh, Books that I used to read, but I can't. Like, I tried to reread one of his books last year, and I
Mhm.
just couldn't get into it. And I'm like, God, what happened? When I was like in my late teenage years, early mid 20s, I loved these books. Tony Hillerman.
Yeah, I've used to really enjoy a good Tony Hillerman, and now I don't know that I would. I'd have
Yeah,
to read one again and find out.
it's like, I don't know, maybe, I, yeah, they used to like entrance me, and I would just devour them. And now I'm like, this is really dry.
Yeah, I like because we used to listen to them as audiobooks all the time. This is
Oh
really
yeah, they're
making me
great
mad. I can't
audiobooks
figure out the name of the book I'm looking for in this list.
of Tony Hillerman books,
No,
of books that were audio.
no. The point is we listen to Tony Hillerman books all the time, and because like the same guy narrated them, and he did a fantastic job of them, because he could do like all of the Native American words with good, pronunciation and stuff, and you're just good at it, perfect reader for the
For the genre,
for
for
the
the
genre,
story.
for the author even. And looking back on it, I don't know that I would enjoy them as much as I probably would, actually, because I don't know, maybe, but I can.
Maybe.
They're very dry, and he's one of those authors that he writes the same book over and over again with a different plot every time.
Yeah.
In that there's like 3 mysteries that are wildly unrelated that all finally coalesce and realize, oh, this is the solution to all of them. And
Yeah.
once you've read one, you've read them all. The fun in it is seeing how he ties them back to all that together.
Mm-hmm.
Clive Cussler does the same thing. There's the part of the story that's in the past where it starts out and like a ship sinks, because that's Clive Cussler's thing. And then there's the part that's in present times. And for some bloody reason, they always merge up.
Yeah, and it's like, aha! We're now that much richer with our white bag douchebaggery.
Yeah.
Roll me another joint, Moneypenny.
Money.
I mean, random white chick.
Yeah.
Oh man, I love books. I
This might have been a physical book. I'll have to go look at my bookshelf.
not now. Later.
Yeah, later.
You have to report back to us with this insanity that has come across you.
Wait, I think I found it.
Okay.
Let me double check the plot really quick. Yep, this is called The Third Gate. And it's apparently the 3rd installment in a series, and I came into this with a mess in the middle, but it holds up on its own. It's written by Lincoln Child, and it does a whole thing where there's possibly some kind of, supernatural stuff going on that seems like it gets, and it kind of comes to the end where maybe there's a scientific explanation, maybe there isn't. And I don't want to give it all away because it's a reasonably good read. I really enjoy pretty much everything I've read by Lincoln Child. Him and Douglas Preston write a series of novels together, the Pendergrast series. They're like 14 or 15 novels into that mess. And they're all really exciting, mystery novels that are really enjoyable. But this, finally finding the point that I was making 10 or 15 minutes ago, that's the name of the book, and it does the thing, with this person is a paranormal investigator, but, maybe it's all just, funny feelings and heebly-jeeblies, or maybe in science, or maybe there's something actually going on. Which
But
is
they
an
never
interesting
really
blending of genres, like we were talking about, science fiction and fantasy coming together in a interesting way.
Interesting. Not too contrived.
Maybe
Just
I have read all of them.
just kind of playing together like kids. Oh, sorry, had a soft spot in my heart for a moment for books that work well.
Yeah.
Well, with that, let me ask you an important question.
Okay.
Are you ready for it?
I'm ready for an important question.
I want to make sure that you're braced.
How braced do I need to be?
I don't know. How much whiskey do you have on hand?
Not enough. Go ahead.
Okay. How bitter are you?
How bitter am I today?
Yeah.
Or do you want to know how jaded I am? Mainly bitter?
Bitter. No, I want to know how bitter you are, and then I'm going to ask you about the jaded scale.
What's the scale for bitter?
No scale for
I
bitter.
have to make up my own scale?
No, the scale is reserved for
Being jaded?
jaded. You
But
could just tell
I
me
have
with
to quantify
words.
in words my own bitterness.
Yes.
Well, that's a dangling participle if I ever heard one. Quick, change the subject while I figure out an answer. How bitter am I? I'm barely bitter at all today.
Barely bitter.
Mainly because I've been managed to keep my mind off the things I'm bitter about.
I would say that bitter wise, like a peach that's a little bit too ripe.
So you're just a little tart?
Yeah.
Yeah.
See? now jaded scale.
How jaded
My good
am I?
friend. Yeah, how
Well,
jaded
I
are you?
have this feeling to me that bitter and jaded go hand in hand. I'm not real jaded today either. My life's been going pretty all right, and I'm gonna go with like a 2 on the jaded meter today.
Yeah. I've had some wins this week, which I very much appreciate. I'm rereading books that I love and realizing why I love them. I would say that I'm a 1.
Ooh, even better.
Yeah, I know, right?
Look at us being all civilized.
No. If we really wanted to ask you, on a scale of 1 to 10, how disillusioned are you?
How disillusioned am I on a scale of 1 to 10?
Yeah.
47.
47. Disillusionment.
I'm not
tied
bitter
with
about
being
it,
jaded
but I
or
am
bitter.
disillusioned.
Oh man! So I have a quote.
Okay. I
That actually
had a quote,
has
and now it doesn't it doesn't apply to anything. So I'm going to find another one while you read that one.
Mine actually has to do with writing.
Actually, I have a quote.
Because I've been doing a lot of writing, or getting back into the writing trend as of late.
Yeah.
And it's J.D. Salinger, The Catcher in the Rye. What really knocks me out is a book that when you're all done reading it, you wish the author that wrote it was a terrific friend of yours, and you could call him up on the phone whenever you felt like it. That doesn't happen much, though.
True. But when it does, there's barely a better feeling in the world.
Well, yeah, and like what made me think of this is that I've been rereading these books by Dennis McKiernan, and I sent him an email. I think I said this a couple weeks ago. I sent him an email just like telling him how much I appreciated his work, and I'm rereading them all. And he actually replied back, and it was really cool.
No, that's awesome. It's always fun when the authors still give enough of a hoot about what they're doing to appreciate their fans to that level.
What I love most about it is that this guy's like in his mid 80s, and he replied back on an iPhone.
Props to that man, sticking with the times.
Sticking with the times.
And that's our title for today. Well, I just remembered something I said earlier this week that got a good laugh out of a bunch of people. And I marked it down in my mind as something to remember. So this is my quote from me. And it doesn't really apply to anything today, but
Is that even
just
allowed?
with me. Yes, it's allowed. You can quote yourself. If it's a really good quote and people appreciated it at the time, you can use it again.
Okay.
And this quote is, "By the time you're old enough to know better, you're too old to do it anyways."
Sounds familiar.
Hmm.
I like it.
Yeah, that's because it's very true in life. All those ridiculous, painful things you did as a young person, by the time you're old enough to know better than to do them, you wouldn't even try anyways.
See, I don't know, because I've thought of some things that I did as a young person that were probably stupid that I would
still do?
totally do again.
But like, jumping off the barn roof in a diving roll, yeah, I wouldn't even get on the barn roof now, let alone diving roll off the sucker.
I've never wanted to do that.
I lived a young and foolish life. Well,
Alright.
at this point, we are the longest podcast in Proteus history. So, remember, follow us on Twitter for updates when new episodes come out.
Follow us on Apple's iTunes Store or Stitcher.
And, in a new bonus, subscribe to us on YouTube. We are Proteus Podcast on YouTube. And all episodes are now available.
Yay!
All that fun things being said, I've been Jacob.
And I'm still Danielle.
And we have been the Proteus Podcast. Good night, everyone.